Thank you, Andy. You do such a good work. I got to do my password in my computer again. I wanted, I don't know about you, but I don't believe in coincidence. I think as followers of Christ with the Spirit of God in us, there's some work that goes on we need to acknowledge and not call it coincidence. I'm thankful. The school that I attended, I can't think and type at the same time. I just proved it, didn't I? There we go. That I attended with Connie as college students, and then where I worked for almost 30 years. Won yesterday in the semifinals of the Division II football playoffs. And I was supposed to preach next week, and I had talked to BC, and I said, can I switch with you? Because I want to go to the game if they win. Didn't know if they'd win or not, but I switched just in case. And I'm delighted that they did, and we're going. But I think also the Spirit, this is just how I place meaning on things, and I would invite you into that because we are empowered by God. That the Spirit was at work and knew that BC didn't need to have the burden of feeling like he had to stay and preach when his dad needed him to go up to George West. And I'm thankful for things like that, and I'm thankful to see it that way because I believe in a powerful God. So today I want to speak a bit about grace and truth. And I want to begin today by just sharing a story about what happened to me this week in Walmart. I haven't even told Connie this story. It's not a big deal, but it is representative, I think, of our life dilemma. So I'm in Walmart, and this is the neighborhood market over here on Texas and 18th. And I'm cruising around, picking up a few things that I need. And I come around onto the back aisle, which is a pretty wide aisle. And I come off of an aisle and come into that back aisle. And there's a gentleman sitting on my left with his cart stopped. And there is another gentleman across to the other side where the frozen food meats are, with his cart parked. And I have my phone in my hand with my list on it. And I'm coming around that corner and I see this gap and I think, you got it. You can make this gap. Coming around, and because I was careless with my phone and then I had one hand on the steering wheel, I hit the guy, just barely nudged his cart with my cart. And I thought, oh no. And I apologized right away. And he looked up at me. He was startled, of course, because this is against convention, right? This is not what we're supposed to do. And he looked at me, and I could see startled, and I could see a little bit of frustration and maybe a little anger on his face. But I'm saying, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And he looked, and then he said, can I have your license and registration, please? I was so thankful that he responded to me that way, because that just put me in a place of, I didn't have to worry about offending him. So he brought what I would call into that moment grace. He gave me a gift because I had broken the rule, right? I had been hurrying, I had been careless, and I had hit his buggy. And that's just, it's not a big deal, but it's part of our social convention. So this small representation of how life is and what grace looks like and feels like in that moment. Well, I want to talk about a little bit about this idea a little bit more, and there's some things that are really important to me as we consider this thing, grace and truth. And John writes, and you're familiar with this, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I think this is very important for us because I don't know if you're like me, but when I read Scripture, there are all kinds of things I learn. But understanding that Jesus is the embodiment of the Word and having his life to look at really helps me a lot about how to know how to go about living out Scripture. Not just trying to do what the words on the page say, but look at how he manifests himself in life. So he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I'm going to skip a little bit, but I'm going to come here. This is the place where I want us to just kind of rest and wallow in a bit today. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. This holding together of two things that are really important and really need to be held together. And I want us to explore that. Grace and truth. This is Jesus. This is who he was. John describes him here in his glory, full of grace and truth. And he goes on and he says this. He says, John testified concerning him. He cried out saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me." Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. So, this idea that we have access to grace because Jesus came. And we all know this, right? But he came in grace and truth. And we need to hold those things together. And John gives us examples of grace and truth in action. And I would like to look at a couple of those today. The first one is in John chapter 4. And we're familiar with this story. It's about the woman at the well. But she's not just a woman at the well, is she? She's a Samaritan woman. And she's not just a Samaritan woman. She's a woman who's living a life of sin. So Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it's not Jesus who baptized but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. Well, okay, the straight shot is through Samaria from Judea to Galilee. That's the straight shot. But many, if not most Jews, chose to avoid Samaria, not travel through it, because they were the bad guys. They were people they didn't want to associate with. And they would cross the Jordan River, which I've seen the Jordan River, and it's not an easy cross. I mean, you've got to really want to avoid something to have to wade across that river twice. So they go across the Jordan, go up the other side of the river, and then come across out on the other side after they pass through what would have been Samaria. So, but Jesus was like, we're not doing that. We're going through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon, so heat of the day. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. So here we see the beginnings of grace. How is that? Well, they were in a lonely place. It was a woman. It was a Samaritan. And this was not done. But he broke convention. And he offered her something just by asking for a drink. And he needed a drink. He was tired. He was thirsty. He needed a drink. But he would have avoided that discomfort if he were, if you will, a proper Jew. But he didn't. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." So Jesus is hinting at that grace right now with that word gift. The gift of God. "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" So she's throwing it down. She's getting into it with him. She's going to challenge him a bit about the Samaritans and whether they're legitimate. Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." So here we're watching this interchange that's happening between Jesus and this Samaritan woman. And we're seeing a combination of grace and mercy. He is talking to somebody that has been shunned, but he's also talking about truth. And here, this truth that he just revealed, whoever drinks the water I will give them will never thirst, is confusing. And often we are confused by the truth of Jesus. It's disorienting, and it needs to be. Because what Jesus offers us is something different than the world. It has to be disorienting. It has to be confusing at first as we come in contact with it. But he does it with grace. He's having a conversation with her when he really shouldn't. And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." So here's another truth that Jesus is laying on the Samaritan woman. And it's really kind of a hard truth. Jesus brings each of us truth that confuses and truth that convicts. And here is a truth that convicts. But he's doing it with grace. He's doing it in the context of offering her a gift in a way that is going against convention. "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." So she's going quickly to the major theological kind of question there that causes tension. "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet, a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in the truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in the spirit and in truth. So now Jesus brings a truth in the context of this grace that is changing. He's challenging status quo in a strong way. He said, I want you to understand that what I am bringing, the truth that I am bringing, is something different than the way you've been thinking about this. We're not going to worry anymore about whether you worship at the temple or you worship here. What we're going to do is we're going to change this up, and we're going to just really think about our relationship with God. What does our relationship with the Father look like? And we're going to unburden our worship and make it a thing that we can do anywhere, any place, anytime. The woman said, I know that the Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. And Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Wow, what an amazing moment. What an amazing moment of grace that he shared with her, this Samaritan woman who was living with the man that she was living, that was her partner. And he chose her to reveal himself as the Christ. What an amazing action of grace. And that grace, that revelation, that sharing with her, that, if you will, vulnerability, because he was moving into Galilee because the Pharisees were upping the ante on him. He was getting uncomfortable for them, and they wanted to put some pressure on him. And so he said, well, I think for right now I'm going to go to Galilee. But he made a serious statement to her. What a wonderful example of truth and grace. For he is the truth, right? I am the truth. So many Samaritans, there's a little bit there, I'm skipping a discussion he had with his disciples, but on into 34. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. Which I don't know what length of conversation they had, but I know it wasn't that long, right? But she was amazed by what he was doing. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days in Samaria with his people. What an action of grace. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we've heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. I wonder if we'll get to hear some of what Jesus said to some of the others. That would be interesting to know. If we can kind of, maybe in heaven, get to listen in on some of those conversations. Everybody share with us. You know what he told me that day? I think that'll be fun. So what does grace look like alone? Because this truth and grace together, I think, is really important. I think that grace by itself sometimes gives us carte blanche. It gives us the freedom to sin, or at least to not change. Grace without truth is an abuse. But what does truth alone look like? Wow. I can tell you in my growing up days, it was a long time. I was probably 28 years old before I really began to know what grace was. I wasn't taught about grace. I don't know if that were any of your experiences or not. But I felt such a burden. I did not feel freedom in Christ. But as I began to understand, there was a harshness and a hopelessness too, because I kept trying to do it, but I knew I couldn't. I wasn't enough. I couldn't get it done. I still can't. I'm a lot better than I was, but I still am not perfect. I still sin. So truth alone is not what we need, and God knew that. So he sent, in his fullness of his glory, Jesus, full of truth and grace, together. And we desperately need both those things. So another story that represents us maybe better than any story in the New Testament is in John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group, and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started writing on the ground with his finger, and when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. There's a lot to unpack there, and we're not going to do that today. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "And neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Here, right here in this one statement, Jesus embodies the fullness of truth and grace. What a balance. Neither do I condemn you. The grace offered. Go now and leave your life of sin. The truth. Your sin is killing you. Your sin is not good for you. It hurts you. Find the different calling in life. Sometimes grace is difficult to understand. Sometimes we're a bit arrogant in our response to grace because we think we know better than God does whether or not we deserve his grace. Well, the simple answer to that question is we don't. It's not something you can deserve. Sometimes we get arrogant and keep God away because we know I'm not good enough. But none of us are. We can't do enough to deserve it. And we can't do enough to merit it. This was an interesting parable that Jesus tells. It sometimes, I think, a bit confusing, but I want to offer this parable from Matthew 20 to you in a way of considering what grace looks like. For the kingdom of heaven's like a landowner, Jesus says, who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. And a denarius at the time was the kind of reasonable pay for the day. So it wasn't an unfair wage. It was considered fair. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever's right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out, found out still others standing around, and he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." So the workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. Could you see them standing in line, waiting, and wow, they got a denarius. I wonder what we're going to get. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. Though these who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. It was unfair. It was unfair. But he answered one of them, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired the last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I'm generous? So the last will be first and the first will be last. Grace is unfair. It's not what we deserve. In some ways, we could argue that it is unjust. I don't think it would be the right argument, but I think we do make this argument. I think we make this argument quite often. I think too often we're absorbed with fairness or justice. I can tell you that I'm a person who likes justice. I'm so thankful that God is not solely focused on justice. He is a God of justice, but he's also a God of grace. So the gift of grace is confusing. It's convicting. It's life-changing. If it's not, then we're missing something. So as we finish, I want to go to one more passage. Paul writes to Titus about the power of grace. And I believe grace evidences a relationship of love. God doesn't give us grace on a whim. He doesn't do it for a suspect reason. His motivation towards grace is because he loves us so deeply. And love motivates us. We have hope also because of grace. We don't have it without it. And grace moves us to trust God's truth. Because he loves me that much, I need to think about what, and he's gone to the extent that he has gone to offer grace to me. I need to think also about his truth. Titus chapter 2. Paul is instructing Titus, and he says in the beginning of chapter 2, he's talking to him about teaching. Teach older women, teach younger men, teach the slaves, and he's giving them all these things for Titus to teach. And then he says this, he says, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. Grace teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself up for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. Grace. If we don't experience grace, we are missing out on an important teacher. We can't learn well how to say no to worldliness and ungodliness, and worldly passions. I'm thankful for God's grace. I know you are too. So how does Jesus' life show us the balancing of grace and truth? Over and over again, his treatment of with the woman at the well calls us to love our enemies, to be graceful, to become like him, to be full of both grace and truth, both grace and truth. To pray for those who persecute you, to forgive 70 times 7. If your brother sins against you, go show him his fault. First, take the log out of your own eye, though. His interaction with this woman caught in adultery, and on. Jesus shows us this combination, this balance together of grace and truth. If you don't know the grace of God, if you haven't experienced his reaching out to you, if you don't know about his truth, I would invite you to find out some more about who he is and what he's called you to. He calls you to be in relationship with him. And you can do that through baptism. And if you are ready, we'd love for you to come today. If you're struggling with this, we can pray with you. So I invite you to come as we stand and as we sing.